And welcome back. Well, Britain finally has a new Prime Minister nearly a week after Election Day. The results of the election saw none of the parties reach the required 326 votes needed to form a majority government. The two major parties, Labour and the Conservatives, were faced with trying to form a coalition government with the Lib Dems. Now, we're used to that here, but it hasn't happened in Britain in living memory. James Cantrill is former news editor for UCB Europe, and he's been working for the Conservative Party during this election. He joins me on the line now. Well, James, I guess congratulations are finally in order for the Tories.
Yes, well, Britain finally tonight has a new Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the youngest British Prime Minister for 200 years. So he had to get a deal with the Liberal Democrats, meaning, again, a first coalition government in the UK for 70 years. So a lot of firsts here in the UK after that election. It will mean Liberal Democrats round the cabinet table for the first time in decades. Some of the promises that the Conservatives made during the election have perhaps had to be negotiated. Again, this is all up in the air. The actual deal hasn't been revealed as yet, but it does look like one of the key promises the Conservatives made on inheritance tax may have to be pushed to the sidelines for a while because the Liberal Democrats are completely against that. But it is believed that one of the key parts of the Conservative manifesto, and that is making severe cuts in public spending this year to try and deal with the deficit, that apparently will stay, and the Liberal Democrats have agreed to support that.
One of the fundamental problems behind reaching an agreement was that the Liberal Democrats wanted to change the voting system away from first past the post, but most Conservatives are dead set against that.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about this marriage, if you can call it that, between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, because although there are a number of similarities between the parties, there are some really big differences. One of the differences is Europe, but a lot of people don't think that's going to be a major problem because we're not expecting on the immediate horizon any major issues over Europe, any treaties or anything like that coming up. Another one is on immigration. It'll be interesting to see how the two parties deal with that. The Conservatives seen as having one of the most hard-line policies of the main parties on immigration, whereas the Liberal Democrats got attacked by Labour and the Conservatives during the election for their policies on immigration. But yes, as you say, voting reform is the big issue. The Conservatives have always been big fans of the current system in the UK, first past the post, the voting system for general elections here. The Liberal Democrats are completely signed up to as one of the, as we expect him to be new cabinet member for the Conservatives. Michael Gove said, he said voting reform is in Liberal Democrats' DNA. It's something you can't get away from. They want a new system of proportional representation because they feel that they're always underrepresented in the amount of seats they get in Parliament. They're always getting around 25% of the vote in recent elections, but that's certainly not being reflected. And you can see that in the general election we've just had. They only got a few percentage less of the popular vote than the Labour Party, but Labour come out of the election with 200 odd seats and the Liberal Democrats 50. So you can see how they feel the system is skewed against them. What the Conservatives finally offered the Liberal Democrats is a referendum on the alternative vote system. Without going into lots of detail, it basically means you number the candidates 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And you make sure that any candidate has to get more than 50% of the vote before they're elected. The Conservatives say, and I think a lot of Conservatives say, that is the least offensive system to them of proportional representation, and the Conservatives have agreed to hold their noses and have a referendum on that. But they are reserving the right to campaign against it in that referendum. And it seems that the Liberal Democrats have decided that on voting reform, that's the best that they're going to get.
I was impressed that David Cameron paid a really nice tribute to Gordon Brown, saying that he left the country in a better state than it was in 10 years ago.
Yes, I think although the British system of government means that often all anyone sees is leaders of different parties knocking chunks out of each other across the floor of the House of Commons, I think there is actually quite a bit of mutual respect between these politicians at times. And indeed, I think we saw a little bit of that this evening with David Cameron paying that tribute to Gordon Brown. It is, a very historic day, because although Gordon Brown has only been the Prime Minister for three years, he was the Chancellor for all the time that Tony Blair was the Prime Minister. And this is really the end of 13 years of New Labour rule here in the UK. Quite a big day for them finally to be moving out of Downing Street and the Conservatives to be moving in. I think David Cameron really did acknowledge that and acknowledge what a big historic day it was, and obviously how difficult it will be for those people who've been involved in the New Labour project. Obviously, that being the transformation they had to make of the Labour Party to get elected in 1997. So I think he wanted to acknowledge that, but then also to acknowledge the problems that the country is now facing, the massive debt that the country has, and really wanting to emphasise that the coalition had been put together because he, as he's been saying, and as the Liberal Democrats have been saying, want strong and stable government to be able to sort out the problems.
Well, James, thank you very much indeed. And that's our programme for this week. Don't forget that we would like to hear your thoughts on our programme. You can always email us your feedback at yourviews@rbg.co.nz. That's yourviews@rbg.co.nz. And you could receive a copy of this beautiful study Bible courtesy of the Church of Christ bookshop. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week. Bye for now.